You're listening to a Very Spatial podcast, episode 726, November 12th, 2023.
Hello and welcome to a Very Spatial podcast. I'm Jesse.
I'm Sue.
I'm Barb.
And this is Frank.
And this week we're going to be talking about the fact that we are the first day of Geography Awareness Week 2023 and some of the things that, are important to us about geography, specifically around the theme of place. But first, of course, some news. First up this week, drone data continues to become a little bit easier to get. Recently, UP42 and Globe, which are, I think, both German companies, signed a partnership to bring drone data into UP42's geospatial marketplace. And so, in addition to UP42's already existing offerings in terms of satellite, aerial, other types of raster, largely imagery, Globe's on-demand drone data is going to be available through UP42. So it's just an example of how drone data just keeps getting a little bit easier to access, even if you don't have a drone.
I sort of feel like this is kind of relates to what I think is kind of the next big hurdle for GIS and remote sensing, which is getting data a little more uniformly out there. When you go looking for data, you have to go look a lot of different places to find a lot of different pieces of information. And it feels like the next 50 years is going to be about how do we get this into ways that is, easily laterally findable.
I agree on a much shorter scale. I think it's actually been kind of a cyclical thing. We've seen attempts to do data marketplaces a few times, and they start to do well, especially some of the more open source ones, and then they kind of don't. They fall out of favor because REST comes out or a new data format. We start moving to GeoJSON, and just, these little things just keep changing how we look for data. And of course, the strength of those places that we're looking for data, if they're not quote unquote authoritative sources, they don't necessarily always have funding models behind them. So it's hard for them to maintain, I think, some of the ones that we've seen in the past, at least. Or they get bought.
And the other thing that happens is they get too ambitious, I think. And sometimes they'll go, we're going to come up with a semantic data model. So all the data knows about itself. And when you look for one thing, it'll be automatically linked to all the things. And you go, okay, good luck with that. And it never really works out because it turns out doing that's really hard. And it gets the funding model. Who's going to pay to develop that? That's always a problem. I think it's a big problem. To my mind, one of the big gorillas in the corner that we need to start going, hey, we need to start thinking about this guy. He's getting more and more complicated.
Which is just information literacy in general, right? Data literacy, information literacy.
And Sue, make the reference you want to make. Ambient findability. I'm surprised you didn't say it immediately.
I did not, but I was also thinking too that we have to also contend with kind of changing ideas, as you pointed out, like who's going to pay for the data and how it's going to be. So a lot of times now, I think that some of the earlier free data set clearinghouses and access things are, some of them aren't around anymore. Others are not really being updated and stuff. So that is, I think, a crucial question, and one that goes in cycles too. So that really impacts like how and when you can get data.
To me, though, the other thing that's like an incongruence that happens at the same time is I've heard more about digitizing again in the past few weeks at different scales. So it's sort of contending with one huge thing that just never went away as something that needs to be done with another way of really generating data. And we need all of it. We need this, but we need it to be findable. We need it to be usable, accessible, up to date. It's an immense task that can't be done by just one thing. Also in the news is something that is growing and becoming more popular, and it's really neat to see, is the use of augmented reality for artwork around the world. And in this case, there is a new tour of the augmented reality Dakota Landmap of the Twin Cities, Minneapolis and St. Paul. And it is a revisiting of Indigenous reality. So it's just cool to see these out there being used and being a part of the announcement that goes on for regular city events and other events.
And whenever I see kind of cool stuff like this, I mean, it's like, oh, AR is great, but AR, is one where you have to be in the physical space. So I'm like, I can't imagine what I could make an excuse for to go to Minneapolis, St. Paul to actually see the installation. But it's an amazing piece of art.
Yeah, that for me, that was it. It's really good art and a really good use of the augmented reality.
Celebration of Prince's birthday. There's a reason you can go to Minneapolis.
Yeah, there you go.
QGIS 3.34 Prizren has been released. And so if you're not relying on the LTS, but maintaining on the cutting edge of QGIS implementations, this is your option. LTR is still 3.28.12. So if you're maintaining the LTR, not for you, but you can head over to the link in the show notes to find links to all of the different pieces that have been added, including things like cesium 3D tiles, some changes to the map tools, looking at raster row and columns attributes. So basically the pixel attributes, changes symbology, labeling, all the different things that get updated every time a GIS gets updated. So lots of small tweaks. Allowing GPU memory limit configuration. That's good.
I was going to point that one out. That's one of those really nerdy things. You go, ooh, that's actually kind of exciting.
Well, you think it's really nerdy, but if you have an integrated GPU, which is sharing memory with your CPU, and it starts hogging it, suddenly your CPU chokes.
And I'll point out is increasingly common in computing environments, particularly if you're in anything remotely, lab-like or corporatist, where they're buying, masses of computers. It's just a way to save a lot of money. So it is a great feature to add in.
Especially as more of our GPUs, even the Intel integrated or AMD integrated, can actually handle modern GIS environments. So go check out QGIS 3.34.
Esri ArcGIS Pro 3.2 is just released, and it has lots of really cool things. In typical Esri fashion, if you go through the list in the link in the show notes, the first stuff will seem boring, and you'll think, why do I care? It's worth scrolling down. There's more stuff down there that I think is a lot more exciting and interesting than what they lead with. But there's a bazillion little things that they've added in, like updates to keyboard shortcuts and things like, how to edit a particular workspace or a single workspace if you want to. But there's also some really kind of exciting things. I think, again, in the nerdy side, the addition of the big integer is going to be very helpful for anyone doing any kind of like really high scale things. It's big numbers that you're dealing with. What?
Big data with big numbers.
Yeah, anything with big numbers, this is going to helpful, because if you've ever had to futz around with the fact that you go, okay, this thing's just not big enough, what do I do? It can be really annoying. You can also do things like 3D base maps, which I think is incredibly exciting. We've been able to do 3D layers for a while now, but now that it can be actual base maps, can be really nice if you're particularly in a city or something like that, or a county. You can make this really cool looking base maps to get used in all your maps that you're producing in some form or fashion. So lots of cool things in a 3.2 release. I'm going to be perfectly honest. I thought 3.2 was already out, but I realized it's 3.1 something.
It's 3.12, I think, or maybe it got up to 4, but it's been hovering since like February.
Yeah, I saw the news and I was like, 3.2's out. And I was like, wasn't it out like a year ago? And then I was like, oh no, it's like 3.12. I think that it was like kind of glazed over that.
I do agree that some of the things that make me more excited are the nerdier things, like the addition of, you can have not just a time field, but now you can have that time field either be a date field without time or time field without date, which is something that you just like, you wouldn't think you would want, but it's just like in some of the data sets.
Once you said it, you're like, oh, I can see uses for that.
Yeah. So it's just little nerdy things.
And in my new job, I'm doing a whole lot of charts, graphs, because that's how you report data a lot of times. And the fact that they have a whole bunch of new charts in there, I'm like, ooh, cool. I can now do maps and charts in the way that they would like to see, which is, again, a nerdy thing, but it is cool.
So 3.2. And to wrap up the news, one that I don't think I would normally put in the news, but it just kind of gave me reasons to want to talk about it. But OpenStreetMap has received a pledge of $150,000 from Microsoft, which is awesome. It's going to support, OSM corporate membership. It's going to support 3 different conferences coming up in Europe, Nairobi, and the US. It's part of the OSM fundraising campaign, so it's going to go to different places and support OSM in different ways. And they also mentioned that Microsoft does support some other aspects of OSM through development, through data contribution. So I think a lot of the, maybe not a lot, but some of the buildings may have come out of Microsoft's first run a few years ago of their building extraction. Of course, there's been a lot of other organizations that have done those and released them as open, including most recently, to kind of jump to a slightly different one. But the Overture Maps recently released a world data set. I think that was almost a month ago now, so we missed that in a previous episode. But yeah, so this is exciting to see for a number of reasons, but I'll let somebody else say something before I keep going.
Yeah. So on the one hand, you read the amount, $150,000, and you're like, what is that? The snack budget at the main Microsoft office? I mean, come on. That's as much as you can pony up. But on the other hand, every little bit does help. So it's good that they're donating, but it is
basically what my first reaction was, which is why I didn't want to say it. So I'm glad somebody else. I kind of hoped there'd be a couple of other things before we got to that one, but it is, for the amount of data that's probably going into Bing that will eventually be dragged into some portion of OpenAI's whatever next level AI tool is going to be for spatial data. Toss them a couple of million.
I literally said I saw 150 million. And I was like, oh, and I was like, oh no, that's a K. That's not an M. And I went, oh, come on.
Yeah.
At least put 1.5. I mean, like you said, with ChatGPT sucking all this stuff in at some level, because it's happening, that they're pulling in that OpenStreetMap, and even though it's not necessarily used to make a generative AI map, they're using it to do spatial, what's near here type of questions. And it's like,
well, not even that, but being it, I'm pretty sure a lot of it in other places where there wasn't a lot of data, they're pulling from OSM.
Yeah, and then he gets into that, volunteer geographic information, that VGI, where there's a quote, and I can't remember who said it, but it talked about it being the biggest shift in change in technology actually was because of people doing things with VGI and being willing to give that information. And OpenStreetMap's done so much, and this is freely available to everyone, and it's become such a backbone, like you said, for even industry pulling it in, that you think there'd be a whole lot of support or understanding of what they've given to the world.
Perhaps we should have an episode where we have a debate of VGI versus crowdsourcing, because I think they're very different things, and I do not believe OSM is VGI.
You don't think
I don't think VGI really exists.
Yeah, crowdsourcing. Yeah, but the quote was about VGI, so I say that. But yeah, crowdsourcing.
I think that irrespective, that's a good topic. We'll have that at some point. But I think that one of the challenges for OSM is that an identity. So many people don't realize that you're using OSM for a whole lot, like you said, for places that there isn't a lot of data, or it's used in a lot of other contexts. And it's unfortunate. It reminds me of years ago when in the state of West Virginia, and this West Virginia is not unique because lots of states have had this problem, where Google was taking data from open data. It was free. Anyone could use it, and Google was welcome to use it, to take this geospatial data and put it into Google Maps. And then you had people in charge going, why am I paying you? Google Maps has it all. Not understanding how the data flows, and where the entry points are, and wherever their value added points are. And I really feel like OpenStreetMap just doesn't get the credit it deserves for the data entry point, not just the value added point.
And just to point out that only makes them the second Platinum corporate member. And that's a global statement, right? That of all the companies that are pulling, and only $150,000 got them to be a Platinum corporate member. And actually, no, it wasn't even that. That's the Platinum corporate membership and 4 other things.
And let's point out, who was the first Platinum member?
TomTom.
not Esri. And you've got an entire data layer in there that you can add in an OpenStreetMap. Come on, Esri.
Yes, but I thought the platinum membership thing was kind of new.
It is.
Yeah. So to be fair,
Still, I mean,
They are a corporate member. So Esri is a corporate member along with Mapbox. Microsoft has moved up from Gold to other Facebook, Grasshopper, Grab, and Gojek. Companies I've never heard of before are Gold members.
But obviously they're using it and they feel that they should be, giving back. Yeah. And that says something because, working in a volunteer space, a lot of times all you feel is the pressure when you're not able to do things and things aren't working well, than rather when, like OpenStreetMap, when they're just working so well that everyone can access them, use them, and partially it's because of the reliability.
I get that you're trying to be a positive spin on this, but we're trying to guilt companies into giving more money.
Esri.
Well, not just Esri, because, I don't know if I see Hexagon on this list.
You're right. There are a lot more we can call out. I only pull out
Bose, even though they sold off their geospatial portion, they're using this data.
Yeah. Well, Trimble. Anyway.
So yes, we are happy that they are gold members, but come on.
Again, it's wonderful. I'm glad you're doing that. Do better. That's all.
Yeah. And says us who, if we can give $20 a year, we're like, yay, we remembered to do that.
And that's it for the news.
This week's topic is, again, kind of related to Geography Awareness Week. We're not going to talk about that portion. We're going to talk about place and its place in disciplines. Because we talk about it so much from a geographic perspective, and we can only continue to speak about it explicitly from a geographic perspective. But we also have other areas of history and knowledge. So, we have political science people with masters here. We have history masters. We have people with undergrads and ABDs in archaeology. So we do have other things around the table. And so it's not just a geographic thing. And so I just wanted to, since the power of place is the theme, to build on place.
Well, let me just say that, amend what you said slightly.
Mm-hmm.
It shouldn't be just a geographic thing.
It's not.
Unfortunately, well, it's not. I'm talking specifically about political science. Place is important to political science, but I'm not sure political science knows that.
Yes, but it is important to them. And there are people who do publish on political science and place. It's just not the norm. So I'll agree.
Yeah, so that was again slight. I mean, I think as a discipline, it doesn't really think. So let me define place. How I define it, we can agree on.
Keep in mind, there is no definition here. This is Frank's definition.
This is Frank's definition. Is I make the differentiation between space and place, and I say that place is experienced space. So it's the fusion of things that we know about space with experience, and I think that is important in, say, political science because the infusion of, we like to pretend in political science that political phenomena happens kind of objectively. It's kind of, it's a thing that happens.
It's a quantitative metric.
Yeah. But in reality, politics is very passionate. It's very much about experience. It's very much about, in a democracy, for example, how I choose to vote, how I choose to act as a political actor is a function of the things that I've experienced. And the people that I know have experienced. So we tend to talk about in political science the concept of place, again, not explicitly a lot of times, but in terms of grassroots behavior. So as groups work at the local level, and we use a very common phrase in political science, is almost as common as real estate's location, which is all politics is local. So everything starts at the local level and it works its way up to national. And that's very much place imbued to my way of thinking.
Okay. So that's one place for place.
Yeah, I have some insight into this. Recently, I've been working with community health interns who don't have a geographic background, and they were looking at how place is defined within community health. And then they're going to be, this sort of understanding place throughout different disciplines. And what was interesting to me is in community health, they do have an idea of place. It's about community and all the things that we think of place being different people and their experiences and different times and how they feel. But their definition of place of geography, like within their discipline, was basically, well, geographers think about location. And so that's how we differ. So I started to think, well, we need to have these talks about, do we use the term place or how do we define it? Because I had to be like, no, that how you're defining it is how we define it. We see it that way too. So it's not just geographers have this concept of place, but that in other disciplines, sometimes they have a misunderstanding of how we interpret place and how we say it and what we use it for. We all need to get on the same page.
But I don't know if I go that far, because it's okay
at least
to
definitionally.
No, because even in geography, we don't have one definition of place. We have our definition, but we don't have one definition.
Correct.
Well, I mean, if you want to get, at least we should get in the same, bookcase. How about that?
I will say that I have been to a number of various talks, geographers, non-geographers, and many a time the word place will come up, and it's generally being talked about in the same way. So whether it's been explicitly defined or implicitly defined, it's still finding its way into the jargon of not just geography, but other fields as well. So it's nice to see that. And to some extent, space does as well, but there's more variation, I think, on how space is used, which is why I didn't make this space and place.
I like place and its place.
Yeah, and I definitely think with the space part of it, but no, I think Barb's right in that perspective that often what I find is when we're talking about place, and everybody has kind of their own perspective, but just as Frank noted with grassroots being a term in political science, right? Everybody's not always sure that you're talking about place, and so pointing out that you have a similar concept or a similar set of concepts that are just being used around a different term. But I also find it in strange places. So I was just doing a lit review for something else, and I happened to be looking on a university site, and I saw a whole bunch of things and a couple of classes on sense of place, and I think they were just in some kind of environmental program. And I'm like, well, yeah, that's awesome. And then I'm like, well, wait a minute, this place doesn't even have geography like in their curriculum. And so it's kind of interesting, right? But as I've started really delving into my work in the 3D recreation end of things, I'm finding as I work with students and others that come from creative fields and disciplines, right, that a lot of what they're talking about is something that I would add to the definition of place, which is a place is a location that it is about experience, but it's also about evoking emotion, right, a reaction to that experience or something that connects you to that, or a place that you may have never been, and that emotional connection. So when you're recreating places, see, I did it. That's something that is really important to that. And so those in the creative fields like film or in art and those type of things. And I've begun to look more at those in the work that I'm doing to try to understand that in terms of creating experience. Right, because emotion is a big part of experience, which is also why it's sometimes difficult in some disciplines to really work with place because it's so individualized. Right, and there are some disciplines that don't see that as necessarily as a positive.
I know one area where when I talk to them, I feel like we're exactly on the same understanding level of emotion and everything encapsulated in place as sociologists. I think that as a discipline, we very much are using the same lens on place, so that there isn't really a need to have to explain what I'm trying to say as a geographer, because they have a similar understanding within their discipline. Not, similar crossovers with history, but not exactly on the same wavelength where I don't have to, clarify some things.
It's the Foucault Heidegger connection, right? It's those type of perspectives on the social experience and the place that's bound to in both geography and sociology that I think kind of ties that together. And you can get that in linguistics with Merleau-Ponty. You can get, and the other Sartre. How do you pronounce that?
I think it's Sartre.
Sartre?
Yeah.
That is Jesse.
I thought it was Sartre, so
Jesse at VerySpatial.com. If you want to send me if you want to record yourself saying the word correctly, feel free to email it to me.
Sometimes at the end, or
just send me a YouTube link, because there's probably somebody who's already done it. But yeah, I mean, there's lots of those overlaps, especially within the social sciences and humanities. And going back to Sue's example, yeah, whenever we're talking about people who are doing photo exhibits, you have a lot of those themed around place. We can point to New York, New York, and other music that is specifically about evoking a connection to a place. It's his kind of town. Movies are themed a lot of times around a specific place, whether real or imagined. It's often taking place in a very small area. So, yeah, all of these things are connecting that experience and trying to create an experience, if you've been there or not been there, through the art aspects.
Yeah, I think that history is an interesting example because, there are lots of scholars that do, but historically, no pun intended, the discipline tends to not necessarily acknowledge place as its own. I want to use the word character. Maybe that's not appropriate. I guess it's because you were talking about place. That's why I was thinking about characters, place being part of character. But, they don't tend to necessarily acknowledge the importance of place. Often space, yes, but not so much place and its attributes, character, flavor, whatever words we want to use, to, talk about how that really impacts the events that happen. So they talk a lot about the people and their behaviors or lack thereof, but the places that those people existed in sometimes don't necessarily get called out directly, but they are clearly an important portion of historical analysis.
So I'm going to turn to our resident masters in history, who actually had a thesis that could have been a place-based thesis, but did you go into the place, or was it mostly about the person?
That was a long time ago.
It was. It was before the spatial turn too. Ended, but
a little bit
after.
And it was in. So there's different veins, right, of historical writing. But I think to some extent, Frank is right in that, as we see the organizing principle, right? For us, the organizing principle, we would argue, is space and the places within it, right? The organizing thing, the thing that we first think of as explanatory. Even before that, it's descriptive, right? What are we trying to help people understand? It's space and place, right? The world around us. And then how do we explain why it is the way it is, right? And in history, it's the passage of time. And, and I'm giving a very simplistic discussion of this because I haven't practiced history in a long time. But so that's organized, I think, for a historian, right, around the passage of time and events. And so your first explanatory mission is to explain the event, right? The series of events. So what led up to it, what happened, what are the consequences? And within that tapestry, right, might be an understanding of place, because that's the issue too, right? It's the same that we find in place, right? Is something that happens in one moment in time as a historian, or one place as a geographer, or both, right? Is that a lesson for elsewhere, right? So when we understand it, and we present that, right? Are there similarities, those types of things? And so there's kind of this tension, just as there is in geography and other disciplines, right? Between the unique moment, right? And place is very much about experience, emotion. All those things are often unique, but can be felt similarly. In the case of history, right, it's that question of the moment in time and a specific event versus what the French social historians called the longue durée, right? Are these blips in the long kind of movement of something? How significant are they, right? So when they get described, is it about what happened in this place because it's this place? Or is it about the time that, in this combination? So place is woven into the discussion, but not, as you're saying, Frank, kind of often a thing that gets a prime place, right? Or is seen as maybe a key in explaining what's going on.
Or, as he said, a character.
Yeah.
And I'm glad that Sue used the word woven, because I was trying to think for journalism, because journalism is placial. You spend a lot of time trying to convey place and evoking place. But again, it's not as central in terms of saying, place and talking directly about place, even though that's what you're working with all the time. Because that's what journalism is telling that placial story. So it's just really interesting because it is woven within the whole discipline and the whole practice.
can I take a left-hand turn to a completely unusual, I know, shocking to longtime listeners. Frank goes on a weird tangent, but so I was thinking about experience. Again, my definition, space or place is experience space. And I was thinking about another area that I've been involved in my career for a long time, which is user experience, which is usually around how do you experience the technology that you engage in. In the realm of social media, I think that in particular, we start flittering around the edges of place. They're virtual places, without a doubt. Now, when we go into like massively multiplayer online worlds, definitely we're talking about place. Azeroth is a place, even though it doesn't exist anywhere, and it's sort of embodied in a bunch of computers and people's imaginations, but there are experiences there. That's an easy case to make. But I think you can even make the case of something like whatever the heck Twitter is called now. That experience has an impact on that as a place as it exists today versus how it existed, say, 3 years ago, 5 years ago, whatever you want to pick, are different places in the online realm. Threads is a particular type of experience that's designed, not according to them, but everyone agrees, designed to somewhat mimic what Twitter was, but also it's a different place because of that, because of the people that are there and the experiences that you have there. But it's not something we talk about really when we're talking about user experiences or any part of software design. What kind of place are we trying to construct here? It's just now, I think people are starting to recognize some of the concepts of place can have an impact on what a user experience is. Maybe not how Photoshop works, but a lot of things we do in software engineering can be thought about in that context.
I'm not sure how much is being written on cyber geography at the moment, but that was kind of that was the bailiwick of cyber geography. It wasn't how geography is using technology. It is the geography of these environments, just simply as something as simple as IP addresses. It's just a very deep look at the networks and the connections and the geographies that we've created utilizing these network infrastructures. And yeah, so it's something that I feel sad saying that I haven't kept up with as much in the last 5 years. So I don't know where it is, but it's out there. There is lots of publication on cyber geography. So if you are interested in those things, check it out.
So there's a little anecdote, and I just ran across this last night. I was on Reddit, and in one of the subreddits I'm in, they asked about, they put a picture of Century 3 Mall, which is in Pittsburgh, which a gentleman got arrested and is being charged with trespassing, I think, because he was a social media influencer and he was walking around Century 3 Mall filming it. It's closed, it's abandoned, it's dangerous. He had to break in to get there, I think. And so the question was, what happened to your old mall? And so I was going through and reading what people were saying. And somebody said that their mall had been torn down, and it is now one of, is it Epic? I think that has Fortnite. It's one of their headquarters, and I guess it's the main server farm or main area for Fortnite. So now it is a space just for Fortnite. And I thought that was kind of a really fascinating, kind of alteration of place, if you will. I mean, this is a place that was a mall. It was a social hub for a certain point in time. Now is the physical location of Fortnite, which is a social hub in a very different way, in a very different point of time. Anyway,
yet, ironically, still a mall.
Yeah. Yeah. In a lot of ways. I mean, it just was, I was like, well, that's really funny. And that was before I even really noticed what our topic was this week.
I know for me, thinking about my definition, it's easier to approach from explaining what it's not. So typically I start out with, the explanation of it's, that emotion, that feeling about, somewhere that we know or have been to or want to go to or has been in the past. But it's easier to say we all are in the same space, but we all live in different places, even though if we're standing there in the same space. And then that starts that discussion of our understandings of place, that it's, almost philosophical in its nature versus location. not to get too deep into that space and place, but just saying for me, it's easier to start with, here's what it's not, then we can start talking about what it might be.
It's kind of funny she says that, because we're physically in a room, that we're in the same space, and a good, at least half, maybe even more of it's devoted to guitar and music stuff. And the other half is like for craft and a reading nook. And it's very funny as I'm sort of going, well, this half of the room is a very different place for me than that half of the room, and vice versa. It's just kind of funny.
Well, I was just thinking to follow up on that. We talked about this being the theme of Geography Awareness Week, and I was thinking about a lot of what I've been seeing in the news, and just to touch on, because this is obviously a huge topic, but I was thinking about some of the recent discussions over tourism and the impact. Again, there's just tons of stuff on this everywhere. But in terms of place, right? This comes down to, I think it was the Swiss town that had to put up a wall because of the great view. And I got to thinking, right, about our definitions of place and how we pass them on to other things. So in other words, not definition of place like just a general one, but this place means something to me, and here's why, right? It's it's an amazing view. Or just watch the YouTube video where someone hiked for like a day and a half to see the best sunrise in Japan, right? Which wasn't, again, amazing view, but there was all these people around with cameras and everything like that, or you see that. So it's interesting, right? As we talk about place and around the world, we think about what place means to us, and we want to convey that. But in doing so, other people are like, well, I'd like to experience that as well, right? Places experience. But in doing that, we are changing the place. And so we have to consciously define it, I think. And then as others react to that definition, then potentially it changes the place. And I just think it's one small example of a ton of why talking about place and its importance, really should be front and center, because that is a huge question. I think tourism and over-tourism and travel in our modern world is an opportunity for people to experience, but it's the phenomenon of it, I think, is new, and just it's huge volume, and it's really just a huge question, right?
Well, I think we can look at the high school and the college experience of place, for many of us at least, as kind of an example of that, because we all went to high school and the town or city was that town or city at that time. And once you age, as we have a few years beyond that, and you go back,
the building's smaller.
The building's smaller. The building may not be there. The people are different. My high school is a magnet school. My university had like 7,000 to 8,000 students at it. Now it's 20 or so thousand students. It's all these things that are just our experience. That place is fleeting. And whether it's a tourist destination that's changing because of over-tourism or lack of tourism, you saw the same type of things during COVID, that places were very different than 2 or 3 months beforehand because people just disappeared. They're more ephemeral than we kind of talk about a lot of times whenever we're talking about place.
Yes, he's causing lots of emotions.
My high school was built during sort of the boomer era, and there's a whole wing that when I went to school was not really utilized. And I'm just thinking about the lockers. And my senior year, what I did was I just claimed that there's 2 floors, and there's, anywhere I had to go near, I just put my stuff for that particular class in a locker, because they just were not, there were way more lockers than people. And there are a lot less people there now. And I was just thinking about that. I was like, wow, I wonder how they're allocating the lockers, because, there's probably a fourth of the lockers actually are needed. And it was just kind of, because you used to have to rent them. I don't know if you still do, but you had to pay like, $10. I don't know what it was for a semester. We had to pay that. And I just didn't, because there were so many empty ones. Nobody checked that. So it is kind of an interesting thing that you thought. That's why I was off in that particular tangent.
And now I have to ask the tangential question. So did you guys have padlocks or something? Because ours, the combinations were built into the door, so the school could get into them.
Because it was made during the 60s or whatever, we had the type where you could buy a padlock and put it on there.
Gotcha.
But I cheated, because what I did was I just had a notebook that I carried in my bag, they had for every class, and I just put the textbook in there. And like, I didn't care if it got stolen because it's a textbook. And there was nothing else personal in there. So all that stuff I just carried in my backpack. So, but I had an assigned one that had a padlock on it, and I used it so infrequently. When I came back from Christmas break, I had to get the janitor to cut it because I couldn't remember the combination. Anyway, we've gone off on a tangent.
Yeah, so to say, it was just a tangential question.
We'll see whether or not that stays in the podcast. I don't know.
Yeah, okay.
One of the things that I'll say with recent changes with what's accessible to people that we didn't have for a long time and capturing sense of place is that I had, when she was alive, used Google Earth to go back to revisit places with my grandmother. Even if it's just taking pictures and images and sending them. But it really is a way to start talking about what things were like and evoking that sense of place that people had in a way that, we didn't have access to before, to get a better understanding, even of that internal sense of place that's going on, that's, different for all of us. And you don't always see, because a lot of times it's held internally.
Well, to wrap up, I'm just going to toss out one more place of place. As my background is archaeology, it's one of those that, unlike everybody else's, where there's more of a difference between geography and X discipline. Archaeology is so focused on the unit, on interactions within a site. It really has been for a long time a discipline that's tied to coordinates, that's tied to location, that's tied to trying to create or recreate or interpret, or however you want to phrase it, a sense of place in these locations. And it's a lot about points. It's not about polygons until more recently. And, looking at different sites and different places was about comparing those places and who might have been living there and what they might have been doing. So I think, especially since the spatial turn, and we can call that the quantitative revolution for archaeology, I think. So since the 70s, at least, there's been a very strong connection to place. And we can go back to, the father of cultural geography. One of his impetuses to create cultural geography was the fact that he was working with so many anthropologists and archaeologists at Berkeley and being influenced by them. So he, of course, was in turn influencing them. So I think there are a lot of disciplines where the place is kind of an outside idea, but there are disciplines, sociology we've mentioned, I think archaeology and anthropology is another one, where place very much is already a part of the conversation in the way that geographers talk about it.
I actually think those disciplines, in some ways, we're looking at geographers going, you just caught up? I mean, because they've been doing it so long, thinking about place.
We'll save that for a different day. Because that's a whole nother 10-minute conversation. But if you have any thoughts on the place of place in your discipline, if it's not just geography, but, biology, marine science, physics, chemistry,
philosophy.
Philosophy. If you're, then let us know. And you can also check out conferences about place, and specifically Geo Businesses, such as Geo Business 2024, which is going to be the 5th through the 6th of June in London. So about the same time, maybe a little bit later. I thought it usually was in May, but it's going to be in June. And the call for speakers closes in February. So if you want to speak at Geo Business 2024, be sure to check out the link in the show notes. Of course, if you'd like us to add your event to the podcast, send us an email to podcast@veryspatial.com.
If you'd like to reach us individually, I can be reached at sue@veryspatial.com.
I'm Barb at VerySpatial.com.
You can reach me at frank@veryspatial.com.
And I'm available at Kinda Spatial. And of course, if you'd like to find all of our contact information, head over to veryspatial.com/contact.
As always,
We're the folks from VerySpatial.
Thanks for listening.
And we'll see you in a couple of weeks.